Villains exist in every great story. They challenge heroes, create conflict, and, strangely enough, often steal the spotlight. But what makes someone a villain? Are they born evil, shaped by tragedy, or simply making choices they believe are right? The psychology of the villain is a deep and complex subject. It isn't just about cruelty or destruction. It's about motivation, belief, and the way the human mind justifies actions. Some villains are selfish, craving power and control. Others act out of revenge, pain, or even a warped sense of justice. Some just want to watch the world burn. But beneath it all, there is always a reason. A villain's mind is never empty. It is filled with ideas, emotions, and justifications, no matter how twisted they may seem. Throughout history, stories have painted villains in many different ways. In old myths, villains were often pure evil, monsters, demons, or wicked rulers who needed to be defeated. But as our understanding of people has grown, so has our portrayal of villains. Modern stories show them as more than just obstacles. They have depth, pasts, and sometimes even understandable reasons for what they do. They make us question the lines between good and evil. After all, some of the best villains believe they are the hero of their own story. Psychologists have spent years studying the minds of criminals, dictators, and fictional villains alike. They have found patterns, certain personality traits, childhood experiences, and even brain differences that may contribute to what we see as villainous behavior. Some villains show signs of narcissism, obsessed with their own importance. Others lack empathy, unable to feel for those they hurt. Some act out of ideology, convinced that their actions serve a higher purpose. But is villainy a choice, or is it something beyond a person's control? Can circumstances push anyone toward darkness, or are some people simply wired differently? These are the questions that philosophers, scientists, and writers have explored for centuries. And these are the questions we will explore in this article. By breaking down the psychology of the villain, we can better understand what drives them. We'll look at the different types of villains, their psychological and philosophical foundations, and how society and biology may shape them. Most importantly, we will ask the hardest question of all: could any of us, under the right conditions, become the villain? Because when we look into the minds of villains, we aren't just studying them, we are also studying ourselves. What makes someone a villain? Is it an evil heart, a broken mind, or a world that pushed them too far? Philosophers have wrestled with these questions for centuries, trying to understand why people do terrible things. Are villains simply bad people? Or is there more to the story? Some say evil is a real force, something dark and unnatural. Others argue that what we call evil is just a label, a way to describe actions we fear or don't understand. Some even claim that villainy is necessary, that without it, we wouldn't recognize goodness. No matter the answer, one thing is clear. Villains don't appear out of nowhere. Something, whether within them or around them, leads them to become who they are. Let's break down some of the biggest philosophical ideas behind villainy. What is evil? For most of history, villains were seen as simply evil, a force that must be stopped. But what exactly is evil? Is it something that exists on its own, or is it just the absence of goodness? The philosopher St. Augustine believed that evil isn't a real, independent force. Instead, he saw it as a corruption of good. In his view, no one is truly evil by nature. Instead, people turn to bad actions when they seek happiness in the wrong ways, through greed, cruelty, or power. If this is true, then villains aren't monsters. They're just lost souls making the wrong choices. But not everyone agreed. Thomas Hobbes had a much darker view of human nature. He believed that people are naturally selfish and will do whatever it takes to survive. To him, villainy wasn't an exception. It was what happened when society's rules broke down. Without laws or order, people would act on their worst instincts. In this way, villainy isn't unnatural. It's simply human nature unchecked. Then there's Hannah Arendt, a 20th century thinker who studied real-world villains. She argued that many of history's worst crimes weren't committed by wild, hateful people, but by ordinary individuals who simply followed orders. She called this the banality of evil, the idea that evil doesn't always come from deep malice, but from thoughtlessness, obedience, and a refusal to question authority. This raises an uncomfortable idea. Maybe villains aren't always obvious monsters. Sometimes they are just people who never stop to ask, is this wrong? Do villains have a choice? One of the biggest questions in philosophy is whether people have free will. Are villains responsible for their actions, or are they shaped by things beyond their control? Jean-Paul Sartre, a famous existentialist, believed that humans are always responsible for their choices. No matter their past, no matter their struggles, they always have the power to decide who they become. If this is true, then villains can't blame their upbringing or circumstances. No matter how hard life was, they still chose to harm others. But some thinkers disagree. They believe that free will is an illusion, that everything we do is shaped by our environment, our genetics, and our brain chemistry. This idea is called determinism, and it suggests that villains might not actually choose to be villains. Instead, their experiences and biology may have pushed them in that direction. This debate is important because it changes how we see villains. If someone was abused as a child, if they were raised in a violent world, or if their brain simply works differently, should we still see them as responsible for their actions? Or should we see them as victims of forces beyond their control? When villains believe they're right, some of the most dangerous villains are the ones who don't think they're villains at all. Instead, they believe they're doing the right thing, even if it means hurting others. This connects to a philosophy called utilitarianism, created by thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism says that the morality of an action depends on its outcome. If something leads to the greatest good for the greatest number of people, then it's justified, even if some people suffer in the process. Many villains follow this logic. Take Thanos from Avengers, Infinity War. He believes that wiping out half of all life will save the universe from destruction. He doesn't see himself as cruel. He sees himself as the only one willing to make the hard choices. But this idea can be dangerous. Where do we draw the line? How much suffering is too much in the name of a greater good? Many historical figures have justified terrible acts using similar reasoning. Does this make them villains or simply people willing to do what others won't? Then there's Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher who took an even more radical approach. He believed that morality itself is a human invention, a tool used by the weak to control the strong. He introduced the idea of the Übermensch, or overman, someone who rises above normal morality and creates their own values. Many fictional villains embody this idea. Walter White in Breaking Bad starts as a normal man, but slowly rejects traditional morality, believing that he alone gets to decide what is right. Light Yagami in Death Note follows a similar path, convinced that his power to kill criminals makes him a god. These characters don't see themselves as evil. They believe they have evolved beyond society's rules. Are villains born or made? So what turns someone into a villain? Is it their nature, their experiences, or the choices they make? The truth is, villainy isn't simple. Some villains are selfish and cruel from the start. Others are shaped by tragedy and pain. Some believe they are saving the world, while others enjoy watching it burn. But no matter the reason, villains force us to ask deep questions. What makes someone cross the line? Could any of us, in the right or wrong situation, become a villain? And the biggest question of all, if we lived their lives, faced their struggles, and saw the world through their eyes, would we still see them as villains? Villains come in all shapes and forms. Some are powerful and controlling. Others are cold and emotionless. Some act out of revenge, while others believe they're making the world a better place. But no matter how different they seem, most villains fall into certain psychological patterns. Psychologists and writers have studied these patterns for years. They've found that villains often share common traits, certain ways of thinking, acting, and justifying their actions. These traits can be grouped into 5 main types. Let's take a closer look at the 5 major villain archetypes and what makes them so dangerous. The narcissistic villain, obsessed with power and control. Some villains see themselves as the center of the universe. They believe they are better, smarter, and more important than everyone else. Their greatest fear, losing control. Psychologists call this narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. Narcissistic villains crave attention, power, and admiration. They see others as tools to use, not as real people. If someone challenges them, they react with anger, manipulation, or even violence. Famous examples: Lord Voldemort, Harry Potter, obsessed with ruling the wizarding world and achieving immortality. Lex Luthor, Superman, a genius billionaire who can't stand being seen as second best. Hans Lander, Inglourious Bastards, a charming but ruthless officer who enjoys outsmarting people. These villains don't just want power, they believe they deserve it, and they'll do anything to keep it. The psychopathic villain, cold, calculating, and emotionless. Some villains don't feel anger, sadness, or guilt the way most people do. They don't act out of revenge or ideology. They just see the world as a game, one where emotions don't matter, only results. This fits the profile of a psychopath. Psychopaths lack empathy, meaning they don't feel bad when they hurt others. Their brains don't process fear or guilt the same way as normal people. They can lie, cheat, and kill without a second thought. Famous examples: Anton Chigurh, No Country for Old Men, a hitman who decides life and death with a coin toss. Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs, a brilliant but soulless killer who treats murder like an art. The T-1000, Terminator 2, a robotic assassin that feels nothing and stops at nothing. Psychopathic villains are terrifying because they don't respond to fear, love, or reason. They can't be persuaded or bargained with, and that makes them nearly unstoppable. The tragic villain, a victim of circumstance. Not all villains start out evil. Some were once good people who suffered loss, betrayal, or injustice. Instead of healing, they let their pain turn them into something darker. This is called reactive villainy, when trauma or hardship pushes someone down a villainous path. Unlike narcissists or psychopaths, tragic villains do have emotions. They might even feel guilty about their actions, but in their minds, the world has wronged them, and they have no choice but to fight back. Famous examples: Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, Star Wars, a Jedi who falls to the dark side after losing the people he loves. Eric Killmonger, Black Panther. A man shaped by injustice, determined to take revenge on an unfair world. Two-Face, Harvey Dent, Batman. A once noble lawyer who turns to crime after being betrayed. Tragic villains remind us of an unsettling truth. Under the right circumstances, anyone can fall into darkness. The ideological villain, the believer in a cause. Some villains don't act out of selfishness, pain, or emotion. Instead, they believe they are fighting for something greater than themselves. To them, their actions aren't evil, they're necessary. This connects to extremist psychology. Studies show that when people believe in a cause strongly enough, they can justify almost any action. They convince themselves that the suffering they cause is for a greater good. Famous examples: Thanos, Avengers Infinity War, wants to wipe out half of all life to save the universe. Ozymandias, Watchmen, kills millions to prevent a greater disaster. Ra's al Ghul, Batman Begins, believes civilization must be destroyed to cleanse the earth. The most dangerous thing about ideological villains is that they don't think they're villains at all. They truly believe they are doing what is right, even when the rest of the world sees them as monsters. The chaotic villain, destruction for the sake of it. Then there are villains who don't want pure revenge or justice, they just want chaos. These are the unpredictable, wild villains who enjoy destruction, fear, and disorder. They don't follow rules, not even their own. Psychologists link this behavior to antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, and extreme impulsivity. These villains reject structure, morality, and predictability. They enjoy causing pain, breaking rules, and spreading fear, often for no clear reason. Famous examples: the Joker, the Dark Knight, a man who believes in chaos and anarchy. Tyler Durden, Fight Club, a revolutionary who wants to tear down modern society. Pennywise, It, a shape-shifting entity that feeds on fear and suffering. Unlike other villains, chaotic villains don't always have a plan. Their unpredictability makes them terrifying because there is no way to reason with them. They show us the darkest side of human nature, the part that enjoys destruction just for the thrill of it. Villains come in many forms, but they all tap into real psychological patterns. Some are obsessed with power, some feel nothing, some are shaped by tragedy, others fight for a cause, and some just want chaos. But what do these archetypes teach us? That villainy isn't always about being evil. Sometimes it's about belief, trauma, or survival. That villains often see themselves as heroes, and that, given the right circumstances, anyone could become a villain. It's easy to see villains as monsters, separate from the rest of us. But the truth is, they are often just exaggerated versions of real human traits. And that's what makes them so fascinating and so terrifying. Because when we truly understand villains, we have to ask ourselves, could we ever become one? Villains aren't always born, they are often made. A person's environment, experiences, and the society they live in can push them toward darkness. While some may have a natural tendency for cruelty, many villains are shaped by the world around them. What happens when someone grows up surrounded by violence? When they are rejected, abused, or taught that kindness is weakness? What if they live in a world where survival means being ruthless? In this section, we'll explore how life experiences, society, and culture shape the villains we fear. Many villains share a common past, a childhood filled with pain, neglect, or abuse. Studies show that early trauma can change the way a person's brain develops. If a child grows up in a violent or uncaring environment, they may struggle to trust others, feel empathy, or control their emotions. Some common effects of childhood trauma include lack of empathy. If no one cared about them, why should they care about others? Distrust of the world. If life has only brought pain, they may believe kindness is a lie, a hunger for power. If they were powerless as a child, they may seek control as an adult. Famous examples: the Joker, the Dark Knight. His past is a mystery, but in some versions, he was abused and beaten before becoming Gotham's greatest terror. Zuko, Avatar, the Last Airbender. A prince scarred by his father, leading to years of anger and villainous choices. Darth Vader, Star Wars. Anakin Skywalker's childhood as a slave and the loss of his mother led to his fear and eventual downfall. Real-life research supports this idea. Many criminals and violent offenders share histories of childhood abuse. Their actions don't come from nowhere. They are often reactions to the suffering they endured. People need connection. We all want to feel accepted, valued, and understood. But what happens when someone is constantly rejected? Some people become sad or withdrawn, but others become angry. They start to see the world as their enemy. If no one will accept them, they will make the world pay. This is called the outcast effect, when rejection fuels resentment and turns someone toward villainy. Famous examples: Dr. Octopus, Spider-Man 2. A brilliant scientist mocked and dismissed before turning to crime. The Phantom of the Opera. A man shunned for his appearance, leading him to embrace darkness. Carrie. A bullied girl who finally snaps, unleashing her hidden power in a violent explosion of revenge. Real-world studies show that long-term loneliness can cause serious psychological damage. In extreme cases, it can lead to aggression, cruelty, or even violence. Sometimes villains aren't shaped by personal pain, but by the world they live in. In corrupt societies, where power is abused and justice is weak, villainy can become a survival strategy. If people see cruelty rewarded, they may adopt it as their way of life. If injustice goes unpunished, they may take justice into their own hands. In these environments, villainy isn't just an individual choice, it's a response to the world around them. Famous examples: Bane, The Dark Knight Rises. Born in a prison, raised in chaos, and shaped by a system that never gave him a chance. Killmonger, Black Panther. A child of oppression who seeks to overthrow the system that created him. Javert, Les Miserables, a man who believes so strongly in the law that he loses his humanity in enforcing it. History shows us that many real-world villains rose to power in broken societies, where violence was the norm and survival meant embracing cruelty. War changes people. Those who experience extreme violence may lose their sense of morality. Some return from war broken, unable to heal. Others return believing that violence is the only way to solve problems. This is called moral injury, when people commit or witness acts that go against their values, leaving them psychologically scarred. Some never recover. Famous examples: The Punisher, Marvel Comics. A soldier turned vigilante, unable to leave violence behind. General Zod, Man of Steel. A warrior whose only loyalty is to his people, no matter the cost. Magneto, X-Men. A Holocaust survivor who believes mutants must strike first before they are oppressed again. War doesn't just create heroes, it sometimes creates villains. And often the only difference between the two is perspective. In 1971, researchers at Stanford University ran an experiment where college students were divided into prisoners and guards in a fake prison. Within days, the guards became cruel, abusing their power. The prisoners became broken, submissive, and traumatized. The experiment showed that power corrupts quickly. Even good people can become villains if placed in the right or wrong situation. Famous examples: Commodus, Gladiator. A weak man who becomes a monster when given the throne. President Snow, The Hunger Games. A ruler who embraces oppression to maintain control. Dolores Umbridge, Harry Potter. A bureaucrat who turns into a tyrant once she gains authority. The Stanford Prison Experiment reminds us that villainy isn't always a personal choice. Sometimes it's a role that people grow into, especially when no one stops them. Villains don't just appear out of nowhere. Many are shaped by their world, by trauma, rejection, corrupt systems, war, or unchecked power. This raises big questions. If someone grows up in violence, are they truly responsible for becoming violent? If a society creates a villain, should we blame the person or the system? And most importantly, if we had lived their lives, would we have turned out any different? Understanding the social and environmental roots of villainy helps us see that villains aren't just monsters. They are people shaped by forces beyond their control. And that is what makes them so terrifying, because if circumstances had been different, anyone could become the villain. What if some villains aren't made by their experiences, but by their own brains? We often think of villains as people who choose to be bad. But what if their brains were wired differently from the start? Could the way someone's brain works make them more likely to become a villain? Scientists have spent years studying the minds of criminals and psychopaths, searching for clues. What they've found is fascinating and unsettling. Some villains may be driven by biology as much as by personal choice. Let's explore how the brain, chemistry, and genetics can shape a villain. One of the biggest red flags in the brains of villains is a lack of empathy. This means they don't feel guilt, fear, or emotional pain the way most people do. Scientists have found that psychopaths have smaller and less active amygdalas, the part of the brain that processes emotions. Simply put, their brains don't react to suffering the way a normal person's would. They don't feel bad when they hurt someone. In fact, some may even enjoy it. Famous examples: Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs. A cold, calculating killer who shows no remorse. Anton Chigurh, No Country for Old Men, a hitman who sees life and death as a coin toss. The T-1000, Terminator 2, a robotic assassin with no emotions or hesitation. In real life, brain scans of serial killers show reduced activity in the amygdala, making them less sensitive to fear and suffering. Their brains are wired differently, making it easier for them to harm others without feeling guilt. Dopamine is a brain chemical that makes us feel excitement and pleasure. It's what makes winning, taking risks, or even breaking the rules feel good. But in some villains, dopamine levels are unbalanced, making them crave bigger and bigger risks to feel satisfied. This can make crime, destruction, or manipulation feel thrilling. They don't just enjoy causing chaos, they need it. Famous examples: the Joker, The Dark Knight. Thrives on danger, constantly pushing his games further. Tyler Durden, Fight Club. Addicted to destruction, taking bigger and bigger risks. Loki, Marvel Universe, loves playing tricks, causing chaos just to see what happens. Neuroscientists have found that criminals with high dopamine levels often take greater risks. They get a rush from breaking the rules, making them harder to stop. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that controls impulses, decision-making, and morality. It's like a brake system that helps us think before we act. But in some villains, this part of the brain is damaged, underdeveloped, or malfunctioning. This means they may struggle to control their emotions, resist violent urges, or think about consequences before acting. Famous examples: Two-Face, Batman. After his injury, he becomes impulsive and dangerous. The Hound, Game of Thrones. Grew up in violence, struggles with controlling his rage, Kylo Ren, Star Wars. battles his own impulses, swinging between good and evil. Real-world studies show that many violent criminals have damage to the prefrontal cortex, often due to head injuries, childhood trauma, or genetic conditions. Without a strong brake system, their villainous impulses take over. One of the most debated discoveries in neuroscience is the warrior gene, or MAOA gene. Some scientists believe that people with a certain version of this gene may be more prone to aggression and impulsivity. However, the warrior gene doesn't guarantee villainy, but when combined with childhood trauma, it can increase the chances of violent behavior. Scientists believe this might explain why some people from harsh backgrounds become criminals while others don't. Famous examples: Bane, The Dark Knight Rises. Born in extreme conditions, shaped into a ruthless warrior. Wolverine, X-Men. Struggles with his natural aggression, trying to control it. Kratos, God of War. Born into war, his rage seems almost built into him. In real life, studies on violent criminals have found that many carry the MAOA gene, suggesting that some villains may be biologically more prone to aggression. If villainy is linked to the brain, can it be treated? Scientists are studying ways to help people control aggression and impulsive behavior. Some methods include cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Helps people recognize harmful thoughts and develop self-control. Medication. Certain drugs can help regulate dopamine, reducing violent urges. Brain stimulation. In experimental treatments, scientists have used electrical stimulation to improve decision-making and impulse control. However, not all villains want to change. If their brains crave power, danger, or destruction, they may resist treatment. This raises tough ethical questions. If villainy is linked to biology, should we hold them responsible for their actions? Neuroscience suggests that some villains may be shaped by their brains, not just their choices. Differences in empathy, dopamine, impulse control, and genetics can all play a role in villainous behavior. This leads to some big questions. If someone's brain makes them more likely to be violent, are they truly responsible for their actions? If science can predict villainy, should society intervene before someone commits a crime? And most importantly, if our brains were wired differently, could we become villains too? Understanding the science of villainy helps us see that evil isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's biology, sometimes it's fate. And sometimes the line between hero and villain is much thinner than we think. Not all villains are easy to understand. Some don't see themselves as villains at all. Others have good intentions, but make terrible choices. And sometimes a villain isn't truly evil. They're just doing what they believe is right. This makes us ask an important question. What really separates a villain from a hero? Is morality as simple as right and wrong, or is it more complicated than that? In this section, we'll explore how some villains exist in the grey area of morality, making us question what we believe about good and evil. Some characters do terrible things, but we still root for them. These are called anti-heroes, characters who break the rules, hurt people, and make selfish choices, yet still have qualities that make us care about them. Unlike true villains, anti-heroes have limits. They may lie, steal, or even kill, but they often have a personal code. They don't hurt people just for fun, and they struggle with their decisions. Famous anti-heroes. Walter White, Breaking Bad. Starts as a good man, but becomes corrupted by power. Deadpool, Marvel Universe. A violent mercenary who sometimes does the right thing, but on his own terms. Jack Sparrow, Pirates of the Caribbean. A selfish pirate who helps others only when it benefits him. The difference between an anti-hero and a villain. Anti-heroes still wrestle with morality, while villains fully embrace darkness. Anti-heroes have lines they won't cross. Villains, on the other hand, don't care where the line is, or they've erased it entirely. Some of the most interesting villains don't believe they're villains at all. They see themselves as the only ones willing to do what's necessary. From their perspective, the hero is actually the problem. This is an example of moral relativism, the idea that morality depends on perspective. Famous examples: Thanos, Avengers, Infinity War. Thinks wiping out half of all life will save the universe. Magneto, X-Men. Believes mutants must strike first before humans oppress them. Ra's al Ghul, Batman Begins. Sees himself as a purifier, willing to kill to fix the world. These villains make us question, if we lived their lives, would we see things the way they do? In the past, stories had clear heroes and villains. Villains were evil, and heroes were good. But today, storytelling focuses more on realism and complexity. Some heroes make terrible mistakes. Some villains show kindness. And sometimes, the person we thought was evil turns out to be right. Famous examples: Game of Thrones. Many characters shift between hero and villain based on their choices. The Dark Knight, Batman and the Joker represent two sides of chaos and order. Attack on Titan shows how war creates villains on both sides. These stories force us to think deeper about morality, justice, and power. One of the biggest questions in storytelling and real life is whether villains can change. Can someone who has done terrible things ever be forgiven? Some villains seek redemption, realizing they've lost their way. Others struggle with guilt, wanting to make things right, but unsure how. Famous redemption arcs. Zuko, Avatar: The Last Airbender. A prince raised to be a villain, but chooses a different path. Darth Vader, Star Wars. Spends years as a tyrant, but ultimately sacrifices himself to save his son. Snape, Harry Potter. Seems cruel, but is secretly protecting others all along. But redemption is not always possible. Some villains try to change, but the world refuses to forgive them. Others believe they've gone too far and can't be saved. This raises a tough question. How much must someone do to make up for their past? Not all villains start as bad people. Sometimes society creates them. A person may be seen as a hero one day, then a villain the next. This happens in real life with political figures, revolutionaries, and leaders. Some are seen as heroes by one side and villains by another. Famous examples: V from V for Vendetta. A terrorist to some, a freedom fighter to others. Eric Killmonger, Black Panther. Fights for justice, but uses ruthless methods. Light Yagami, Death Note. Starts with good intentions, but becomes obsessed with power. These stories remind us that villainy is often a matter of perspective. One person's hero is another person's enemy. If morality isn't always black and white, and if villainy is shaped by power, belief, or circumstances, then we must ask, could we, under the right or wrong circumstances, become the villain? Studies in psychology suggest the answer is yes. Experiments like the Stanford Prison Experiment and the Milgram Experiment have shown that ordinary people can commit cruel acts when put in certain situations. Even in everyday life, people often justify selfish or harmful actions if they believe they are right. This suggests that, given enough pressure, power, or desperation, anyone might cross the line into villainy. Villains with moral complexity fascinate us because they reflect real life. People are rarely purely good or evil. We all have moments of selfishness, anger, or moral conflict. Stories about morally grey villains remind us that everyone believes they are the hero of their own story. Morality is not always black and white. Redemption is possible, but not guaranteed. Villainy is often a matter of perspective. And most importantly, these stories force us to ask, if we lived their lives, made their choices, and felt their pain, would we have done the same? Because sometimes, the only difference between a hero and a villain is who is telling the story. Can a villain ever truly change? Some villains start off with good intentions, but lose their way. Others do terrible things, then later regret their actions. But does feeling sorry make a difference? Can someone who has caused harm ever really be forgiven? Redemption isn't just about saying, "I'm sorry." It's about taking action to make things right. But not every villain wants to change, and not every villain gets a second chance. Let's explore what redemption really means, and whether villains can ever escape their past. True redemption is more than regret. It requires action and sacrifice. To be truly redeemed, a villain must accept responsibility. They must admit they were wrong. Feel true remorse. They must genuinely want to change. Make amends. They must take action to fix the damage they caused. Face consequences. Redemption often requires giving up power, freedom, or even life itself. Not all villains are willing to go through this process. Some believe they are beyond saving. Others don't think they deserve forgiveness. And some are simply too afraid to change. Some villains do change. They realize their mistakes and work to undo the harm they've caused. Famous examples. Zuko, Avatar, The Last Airbender. A prince raised to be a villain who chooses a different path. Darth Vader, Star Wars. Spends years as a tyrant, but sacrifices himself to save his son. The Winter Soldier, Marvel Universe. A brainwashed assassin who fights to reclaim his identity and atone for his past. These characters show that redemption is possible, but it's never easy. It takes courage, self-awareness, and action. Not all villains succeed in redeeming themselves. Some try, but can't let go of their pain or power. Others want to change, but struggle to escape their past. Famous examples. Severus Snape, Harry Potter. Works in secret to protect Harry, but never fully escapes his bitterness. Kylo Ren, Star Wars. Fights between light and dark, but is haunted by his past. Gollum, The Lord of the Rings. Briefly resists his inner darkness, but ultimately gives in. These characters show that redemption isn't guaranteed. Some villains are too broken to change. Some villains never look back. They don't feel guilt. They don't want forgiveness. To them, their actions are justified, or they simply don't care. Famous examples. The Joker, The Dark Knight. Lives for chaos, never shows regret. Voldemort, Harry Potter. Obsessed with power, never questions his actions. Thanos, Avengers, Infinity War. Believes he's doing the right thing and never seeks forgiveness. These villains are terrifying because they don't want to be saved. They embrace who they are and never look back. Can real-life villains be redeemed? In the real world, redemption is complicated. Some people commit terrible crimes, then later claim they've changed. But should society forgive them? Some key questions. Can words ever erase past actions? Should people who have done harm be given a second chance? How much must someone do to prove they have truly changed? Some former criminals and leaders have tried to make amends later in life, but not everyone believes they deserve forgiveness. Actions have consequences, and some wounds never fully heal. Redemption isn't free, it often comes with a price. Many villains who seek redemption must sacrifice something to prove they are truly sorry. Some must lose their power, giving up control or status to do what's right. Face punishment, accepting the consequences of their past actions. Give their life. In many stories, villains only redeem themselves through death. Famous examples of sacrifice. Darth Vader, Star Wars. gives up his life to save his son. Tony Stark, Avengers Endgame. Not a villain, but a flawed hero who redeems himself by sacrificing his life for others. Boromir, the Lord of the Rings. Tries to steal the ring, but redeems himself by dying to protect his friends. This raises a deep question. Can redemption only be earned through suffering? In the end, the question of redemption comes down to one thing. Can a villain truly change? If someone has spent years harming others, is change even possible? Or will their past always define them? The answer depends on their choices. Some villains learn from their mistakes and become better. Others never do. Some seek redemption but find that the world will never forget their past. Redemption is one of the most powerful themes in storytelling and real life. It reminds us that people can change, but only if they truly want to. Redemption is not just about words. It requires action. Forgiveness is not guaranteed. Some wounds are too deep to heal. Sometimes the only way to make things right is through sacrifice. And finally, redemption teaches us this. No matter how far someone falls, there is always a chance to rise again, but only if they are willing to do the work. Villains have fascinated us for centuries. They are the shadows to the hero's light, the force that drives conflict, and often the most complex characters in a story. But as we've explored, villainy isn't always black and white. Some villains are shaped by trauma. Others are born with minds that work differently. Some believe they are saving the world. Others simply enjoy destruction. And some, in rare cases, try to change. So what have we learned about the psychology of the villain? Stories often teach us that villains are bad and heroes are good, but in reality, villainy is complex. Many villains believe they are doing the right thing. Others are victims of their past. Some are products of broken societies. This challenges the way we think about morality. If a villain is shaped by their environment, should they be judged the same way as someone who chooses to be cruel? And if a villain believes they are saving the world, are they really evil or just misguided? Science and psychology show that villainous behavior can come from both nature and nurture. Some people are born with brain differences that make them less empathetic. Others are raised in environments that teach them cruelty is the only way to survive. The truth is, under the right or wrong circumstances, anyone could become a villain. History has proven that ordinary people can do terrible things when put in extreme situations. One common theme among villains is the hunger for power. Whether it's control over others, wealth, or revenge, villains often become consumed by their own desires.